The Brattle Bookshop is located approximately 40 miles north of the Old Colony History Museum. Its current location stands at 9 West Street in Boston. You can easily reach it by car or train, with a number of parking garages and 2 nearby T-stops at Park Street and Downtown Crossing. It's a 2-minute walk to Boston Common and a number of other historic sites in the city. The Brattle Bookshop has been in operation since 1825 and under the ownership of the Gloss family since 1949. Its current location is made up of 3 floors and a basement for storage and processing, all of which are filled with books on nearly every imaginable subject and era of history, our favorite. Proprietor Ken Gloss shared some fascinating stories with us as we spent the afternoon browsing the seemingly endless bookshelves, and we're excited to share a look around with you today.
I'm Ken Gloss. I'm proprietor of the Brattle Bookshop. I've done this all my life. It was my parents' business. Matter of fact, they say that my first word was book. That I don't know, but I'm sure they were talking about it. And the history of the store goes back to the 1800s, but for all practical purposes, it was going out of business in 1949. My father was getting married. My mother had $500. With that, they bought half interest in the Brattle Bookshop. And it's always been in Boston. People call us all the time. They're in Cambridge. They say, we're on Brattle Street. Where are you? We tell them we're downtown near the Boston Common. When my parents bought the store, there was a little side street in what was Scully Square called Brattle Street. To make it even more difficult, the street doesn't exist anymore. It's where Boston City Hall Plaza is now. We've had 7 different locations over the years, mainly due to urban renewal. And every time my father would move, when it was planned, he'd move the best books over to the new location. Then he'd run sales, half-price dollar, 50-cent, quarter dime. Last day of the sale, though, everything was free. And he used to have hundreds of people line up with bags, packs, satchels, whatever. Ring a big bell, people go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, my father would ring the bell again. They'd leave, the next group would come in, and he gave away over 250,000 books that way. Now, the last time he did this was in 1969, and we were moving from the end of Washington Street near Boston City Hall to where West Street is. And at the end of the giveaway, there were books left over. So my father built the store on his love of books, his hard work, his knowledge, but he also was a character and a showman. And if you can picture this, he hired a covered wagon with a cowboy, a horse team, and on the cover of the covered wagon it said, "Go West, book lovers, go 5 West Street, Brattle Bookshop." They loaded it up with books, and they drove it from the end of Washington Street, up Court Street, down Tremont by the Boston Common to where West Street is, and then back down Washington with my father sitting in back, throwing books out the whole way. Now, the superintendent in charge of traffic was a friend of his, told him he could do it all morning. But within an hour, the city was in an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He'd gotten his point across. And we've been on West Street since 1969. When we first moved in, we were in a 5-story, 150-year-old building, absolutely crammed full of books. In February of 1980, I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning. The building was on fire, and it literally burned to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone. But we wanted to continue to keep going, not go out of business. We rented a storefront a few doors up the street, folding tables, people gave us, sold us, donated books. Kevin White, the mayor at the time, came down with a carload of books. And even though it was a meager stock, a month later, we reopened. Main thing was just keep going. 4 years after that, we slowly but surely rebuilt the stock. In the building we're in now, we bought that in 1983. And it's sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Its outside stands at $1, 3 and 5. 2 floors of general used books, a 3rd floor with rare books, autographs, manuscripts, leather bindings, first editions, and so on. In that type of business, the large, old, general, secondhand bookstore is a dying business. It's not dying because people don't like books, buy books, read books, sell books, whatever. It's just property value has gone so high that rent has gone so high that old bookstores, which are not the most efficient businesses in the world, one right after the other have gone out of business. And like I say, we bought our building in the early 80s. The reason we have an empty lot next to the store is that's where the first building burnt down. And I hope to do this for years to come. When people come in, I mean, a lot of people are just, they want to browse. There aren't that many used bookstores that are open in the cities, again, because of the real estate issue all over the country. So we get huge numbers of tourists, and they just want to see an old bookstore. They've heard of it. One of the things is, we one time read an article that we're one of the most Instagram sites in Boston. If you're out here on a day that's not below zero, or raining or snowing, people are constantly taking pictures of the outside books and then posting them. We love that. So just the oddity of what the store is one thing. But a lot of people come in and they still like to shop. They like to browse. They like to see things they haven't seen. Some are very specifically looking for a certain book. Some just want to look. Some think they're looking for a specific book and they're browsing, and the book next to it that they never heard of, thought of, knew anything about is better. Another thing, we get lots of people calling the estates, you know, we have this, we have that, would you be interested? Or an awful lot, and we try the best we can to answer, is I have this book, I have that book, is it valuable, isn't it valuable? It's sort of like what you see on the Antiques Roadshow, that you know, people up in the attic, down in the cellar. And those, a lot of them we can do over the phone. Nowadays, email and pictures, we do it, and we always answer within 2 business days. And one of the reasons by email, I emphasize that is, if you don't get an answer in 2 business days, it means we didn't get your email. A lot of times you send an email out and, you know, you don't know. So we always answer quickly, or people call ahead, bring things in by appointment, and we are happy to look and see and help. When people ask about what kind of books, or do you specialize, or do you have this, we say we specialize in not specializing. We're a general used and rare bookstore. So one day we might be someone coming in with a book from the 1400s that's worth thousands of dollars. The next day we might be going out to a house that has a general library of just modern fiction and literature, and it's sort of the treasure hunt. That's one of the most fun parts, is going out to houses and estates, never knowing what you're going to see, who you're going to meet, the ideas, the books. And like I say, sometimes it's very specific, and you know, signed books by Robert Frost or Jack Kerouac, or it might be an old first edition of an Isaac Newton book. And other times the main reason people sell books is either it's an older person or couple moving from the big house to the small, or someone's died and it's an estate. There's every other reason you can possibly think of, but that's the most common. And a lot of times when people call up and they want to sell things, we ask them what they have. And sometimes you get a very good answer. Sometimes it's vague. We send pictures. Nowadays, it's real easy to take pictures of the shelves. But you never know in any case. We drive all over the Northeast, all over New England, the greater Boston area. We had a man call us last year, and he said he had 500 books. His cousin had died. We got to the house, there were 20,000 books. It turned out his cousin was a bit of a hoarder, and it was hard to even get in the house. We ended up buying the 20,000 books and moving them. Nothing was terribly rare, but they were, for the most part, good books. And then we've gone and called to the mansions in Newport and around, and sometimes we've gone into the littlest, tiniest places and you literally walk your way through little pathways between the books, and they have the greatest collections that you can imagine. And there are other times you go in and not so great. And one of the things that our outside stands do, when people ask us about this a lot, is the books are all $1, $3, and $5. And but many times when we go to someone's house, the first question that someone asks after we give an offer, it isn't, gee, could you do a little better? Do you have? It's, are you going to take everything? And if you say yes, usually then the deal is done. But in many cases, when you do that, you know, you might be moving 1,000 books, but you really only want a few hundred. And the outside of the here is the way we handle that. And it's also a pressure valve for the store. I swear the store would burst if we didn't have a way of moving those books out. And so it's a pressure valve for us. But it's almost every day that we go out to a state somewhere. I'm going to Newport tomorrow. I was in Manchester, New Hampshire yesterday. We've got a place in Boston on Friday. A few people are last week brought in some very, very rare books. He's driving back to Detroit. We hope we'll get to drive to Detroit to get them back. He didn't buy them from us, but we want to be able to buy them from him. And so that's the real sort of joy of it. And one of the things that people don't realize about the book business is it's incredibly physical. I mean, if you buy 1,000 books in a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather, you've got to move 1,000 books out of a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather. And so one of the first requirements of working here is you've got to be in really good physical shape. And then we ask, where did you go to school and what do you know about books or not know? And most of the people who work here like books, but they're students, either they're students, authors, writers, musicians, artists. They just want a good job that they can do and then go home and not think about it and come back the next day and, you know, feel it's a good time. And we've had a lot of people who have gone on to a lot of interesting things too. It's interesting. You call and someone says, I'm moving, I have books, and they say, and you ask them, well, how many books do you have? And they go, a lot. And then you ask, what kind of books do you have? And they go, fiction and nonfiction, which is every book ever done. So we try to, with some questions, try to narrow that down a little. And if we get in the least bit of inkling that it might be worthwhile, we'll make an appointment and go out. If they're coming into the city, we'll set up a time. If there are specific books, we'll say send pictures. So we try to help as much as we can. And most of that, as long as it's verbal, we do it for free. Again, we want people to think of us. We want people calling. And many people, a lot of times too, if they're looking for a book, a lot of times now the internet does work, but if we know they collect a particular kind of book or they've gone in things or they're a good customer, we, let's say, just got in a library of what they're interested in. We'll either email, text, call and say, hey, we just got this or that in. And some of the things that people look for are unusual and interesting. Some are pretty standard, and again, we like talking about books and meeting people and seeing people and never knowing who's gonna show up or come in. One of the things I took this out just for a reason, and you won't be able to see it on here, but what this is page after page, and there are a lot of pages, and there's maybe a word a couple of words, a phrase. Every single one of those is a story, and I collect stories. And I could do a lecture if you wanted to put a couple of those pages and throw dots at them and say, well, what does that mean, or what does this mean? So I could go on forever. Start with some of the really fun and rarer things. We one time got a call and to go out to a university to look at some older things, and they were didn't specify too much. I went out, and one of the books, I have a degree in chemistry, so when I went to college I was going to get a doctorate. When I was going to go to graduate school, I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that great. I said I'd take a year off and put off graduate school. Well, I don't know after 50 years whether they'll still take me, but that's this is much more fun anyways. But I went out, and one of the books they had was a first edition of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, which is his foundation book. And individually, that book is worth over $1 million. So you're holding it. But it turned out it was Isaac Newton's copy with his notes in the margins. So, you're holding and touching, and even though I deal with things like this, or letters of Washington or Lincoln, you touch something and you know that Thomas Jefferson touched that, and it still gives you chills. And in any case, that was one. Another time I got called to go out to the Drake-it, which is on the Merrimack River, and there was a house. It was a little ranch house, going house. They had some interesting books. It was a younger man, and then on the kitchen table they had this big roll of paper. It was a teletype roll. It was the manuscript for On the Road. When he typed it, he did it by stream of consciousness, and he didn't want to have to take paper. But this was the actual manuscript. I got to pick it up. I got to unroll it a few feet. It was too fragile. It turned out the man who had called me was his nephew. So this was the original manuscript, and I got to hold and touch it. Now, they sold it 25 years ago for $2.5 million, and the man who bought it tours it, so you do get to see it occasionally. But I mean, just that, and then you never know who's coming into the store. You never know what they're going to be looking for. We had a man come in. He actually used to come in when my father was here. He went to college in Boston, and he went to business school at Harvard, I think. But when I first started, which was in '73, he would come in, and he worked at a bank in North Carolina. It was North Carolina National Bank. And I get to work very early. I'm an early person. My wife likes to say I only work half a day. I get in at 5:30, we close at 5:30. It's 12 hours, it's only half a day. So I do work half a day, but I've done this pretty much the whole time I'm there. And he knew that I got in early, and he was a very nice man. And he would call up once in a while and say, look, I'm flying from Charlotte to New York, but I can get the early morning shuttle from New York to Boston. Can I come in at 7 or 7:30 in the morning, and then I can get a flight from Boston to Charlotte, a little later. And we did. And I have to admit, when he first came in, he was a vice president of a bank down there. And no offense to vice presidents of banks, but there are lots of them. It's a nice thing to put. But as a few years went by, he was a senior vice president, executive vice president. His bank merged. And then he was president of Bank of America. And he would still call me up and say, can I come in the morning? I mean, this is president. Now, unfortunately, his health went down. He died young. But, here's the president saying, can I come in? And you get to talk to him. And he was a wonderful person. So I point that out a little to say you never know who's going to be coming in or who that person is, and what they might be. sometimes when I do talks, I bring things. Sometimes I don't. I just tell stories. But there's one that always gets a smile. We got a copy of Playboy. No, I mean, but it's Braille. It's a Braille copy of Playboy. It's for the reading. It's for the articles. And there is no Braille of pinups. But, you know, you'd think, why? What? But the reality is, and it turned out to be fairly controversial, there was, through the Disabilities Act back in the 50s and 60s or whatever, they published a lot of magazines. The government would put them out in Braille for blind readers. And they got a lot of requests from blind readers that they wanted to be able to read Playboy, because they're actually, in the 50s, there were a lot of really great interviews. Matter of fact, nowadays, the interviews are more interesting than a lot of the pictures, except for the first one with Marilyn Monroe on the cover. But it got to some Midwestern congressmen got all up in arms about supporting that, and there was a big controversy. They still printed it, but they, you know, there you are. Or we got called once to a library. You know, I tell the story. Got called to look at a library. It was a public, semi-public, semi-private library. And I got called early when I was working to look at it, and it was really great books. And then every 5 or 7 years, I'd get another call. Could you come back? Could you look again? And it never went anywhere. And then finally, I got a call about 15 years ago, and all of the books had been put in a closet where the janitor kept his supplies. And the books were just stacked and piled up. And my manager went with me, and we started looking, because I knew pretty much, I mean, I didn't know where they were in the pile. And I said, oh, Nicole, would you like to see a page of the Gutenberg Bible, which is the first printed book? And she thought I was kidding, and I pulled it out. It was there in the stacks. And what essentially it had, we ended up buying, it was close to $1 million we paid. But it turned out there was one member of the Board of Trustees who never wanted anything to ever leave the library. And it took 35 years for that person to retire. And one of the things I pointed out, and this does happen, is it just, they were under sprinklers, they were near, but it also wasn't fair to the staff, because if anything went missing, who had keys, who had this, there was no security or anything. So we've run into cases where people have, you know, that's a big issue too. For unusual collections, there's a cousin of ours who's very interested in politics. He's a political consultant, but his collection is 1968. He collects books about 1968. And every time I get something in that is 1968, and he has a huge collection now of books, magazines, yearbooks, pamphlets, and I just keep sending him, whether he wants them or not, I just keep sending him. But it's a very focused, he felt it was a very important year in the politics of this country. He collects 1968. Another person, if you talk about unusual one, and it's actually not that unusual, he collected Walden. He had 3,000 copies of Walden. The first edition, the later, every edition, hardcover, paperback, publisher, whatever, language, and so on. And actually, when you put it together like that, you see how, from the way the books were produced, the illustrations, how the world looked upon and thought about Thoreau. And you could see it change over the years. And then as far as the favorite books that I've had, I mean, I could go on and on and on about the wonderful things we've gotten to touch and hold. And in the Antiques Roadshow, I do appraisals. And I mean, one of the great parts about Antiques Roadshow is, for being an appraiser, one of the things people don't realize is you don't get paid. You get paid nothing. You don't get airfare, you don't get hotel, you don't get meals. But it's public television, and you get publicity. And why would I ever go to Fargo or Boise or Omaha and and all the people you meet, and anywhere you go in this country, I don't care where it is. And I'm lucky because my wife comes with me, and we can usually go a few days early. Anywhere you go in this country, it's beautiful and the people are nice. Don't talk about politics and religion, but it's nice. And some of the things that have come into that show have just been wonderful. One of my favorites in that was someone came in with a letter written in the Civil War. Their relative was in the hospital in Washington, and it was a 4-page letter, and it was a sort of a standard letter. I love getting letters from home. I hope I'm going to do better. I have diarrhea, which actually, unfortunately, the person died of a few weeks later, I'm sorry. But it was this 4-page, nice, talking about home from the hospital, and it's a typical letter. And then at the very end, there's a little parentheses that says, written by his friend Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman, during the war, volunteered at hospitals, either writing for soldiers who were too sick to write or who were illiterate. And so this whole 4 pages is all in the handwriting of Walt Whitman, and you get to touch and hold and talk about how he volunteered and how these letters are even rarer than letters that he wrote to friends and people, because his friends, when they got letters, knew he was important. They saved the letters. Some soldier family getting a letter, the fact that it said, they might have no idea who Walt Whitman was. And they're just, but that's every day. It's what the new thing is, what you're going to get next. A lot of times, too, people come in and they want to start collecting. And then we'll talk with them about what they're collecting, what their budget is. That's an important part. How you can collect things that aren't expensive or high priced, and still have great fun. A lot of the fun of collecting is the hunt. It's the search. It's going into every bookstore, yard sale, library, books, auction, whatever. And you also tend to meet people, when you do this a lot, who have similar interests, so a lot of the relationships. People, when they work here, we try to have everybody doing everything. First of all, we have 2 managers who have been here for years and years. And yeah, when there are really rare books to check and so on, they'll do a fair amount of it. But we like everybody to either watch, look. I find if you pigeonhole into an area, you get bored quicker. So we try to have everybody do a little of everything. We want everybody to enjoy and be happy. It's good for everybody. The store, we generally are open Monday through Saturday. We don't open Sunday, and we're open from 9 to 5:30. We have a website, Brattle Bookshop, or you just Google Brattle Bookshop, and it will come up. And on that website we actually have a video that describes a lot of that, what to do, how to do it. We have pages that tell how to take photographs of books that help us. But a lot of people will just email. We like to give out a lot of free information. We figure that keeps our name out there. And one of the ways we can do that is by helping, offering, and so on. And in almost all cases, we can help people. Some, actually, we have to do some real research. We can't do it right off the top of our head. And some, you can't make anybody happy, but we have stories about that too. If people ask me a question, the problem isn't getting an answer, it's getting me to stop answering. And, and that applies to most of the people who work here, because if you like what you do and someone asks you about it, like I say, it's not getting them to answer, it's getting them to stop.